Are you also here for the school board meeting? I'm sure you've heard by now, as it's been in the paper, 2 new positions have been created on the Gainesville Board of Education. It has caused a disturbance in some circles because it is the first time that Negroes have been nominated and approved. There are 2 of us who now hold seats on the board. Myself, Dr. Emmett Ethridge Butler, physician, and D.S. Lowe Jr., who is the manager of the picture theater here in town. Mayor Martin and Commissioner Knickerbocker said that this action was taken in an effort to preserve the excellent relationship between the races in Gainesville. And although the commission's move is not unprecedented, it is nevertheless a bold and to some controversial gesture. The decision to add the 2 black men to the board was, not surprisingly, split, even though some may tell you it was unanimous. One commissioner argued our nomination, saying that until the state makes some decision on the segregation issue, I feel we are making one of the greatest mistakes Gainesville ever made. I would have to disagree. I think that this is a good step for Gainesville, a progressive step for Gainesville, and an overdue step for Gainesville. This appointment has also come after many requests from the black community in the past 3 years for representation on the City Board of Education. And our requests went unanswered until the Supreme Court ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education this spring. Because this spring, the justices of the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. Americans all over the country are beginning to realize something that we've known for a long time, that separate but equal education and other services are not, in fact, equal at all. With this decision, the Supreme Court overturned their ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson, which said that racially segregated public facilities were legal, so long as the facilities for black people and whites were equal, which we know was never actually the case. But that ruling stood for over half a century now, legally barring people of color from sharing the same buses, schools, libraries, parks, hospitals, and even water fountains as whites. These laws are known as Jim Crow laws, after a minstrel show character. I was hoping that this ruling would finally be the death of Jim Crow. But even with this ruling, Gainesville still has segregated schools. Next door, Forsyth County is already engaging in efforts to ratify a proposed segregation amendment. This amendment would give the Georgia General Assembly the authority to make grants intended for educational purposes, effectively maintaining the current state of segregation, completely disregarding the Supreme Court's ruling on segregation. I hope my presence on the school board can change that. I can steer Gainesville down the path of desegregation. I consider myself a progressive man. I even started the men's progressive group where men just like me can come together and advance our community. We can share our ideals and work together to make them a reality. The club now operates with the Hall County NAACP chapter, which I was also the first president of. I want to make a difference for my child, just like Oliver Brown did for his child and children all over the country when he filed a class action suit against the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, because his daughter, Linda, was denied entrance to Topeka's all-white elementary schools. My wife Lillian and I have a beautiful little girl, Catherine. And one day, Lillian and Catherine were out shopping. Lillian is a fast walker, and she was just striding along through the shops. Catherine was lagging behind a bit, her legs being considerably shorter. But then she stopped in front of one of the fountains and called to her mother, "Mama, there's a white water fountain and a colored water fountain." Lillian just said, "Come on, Bunky." That's our nickname for Catherine. And tried to keep on walking, keep on pushing through just like we always do. But Bunky stayed in front of the water fountains and said, "But I want to know what color the water is. Is it green or is it red?" Out of the mouths of babes, this moment was one of pain. Knowing my girl was growing up and becoming aware, if not quite fully understanding, the unjust world around her, but also one of inspiration for me. I began to apply the creed of my profession, do no harm, to other areas of my life. No longer was it something that just applied to treating my patients, but now my community. I want to improve my community and make a better world for my daughter, for everyone's children, for I believe we are all God's children. But how do you improve your community? You get involved in it. I already told you about the organizations I founded, and you know I've been newly appointed to the school board. But you may not know that I am also a deacon of St. John Baptist Church, as well as the assistant chairman of the church's financial committee. I also teach Sunday school. I've also been a member and the treasurer of the Northeast Georgia Medical Association, and I've served as the president of the Georgia State Medical Association. I am very involved in my community because I believe in the power of presence. The act of being here now is so important because by being here, I can be the change I want to see. I believe that the African Americans in Hall County and everywhere across this country should actively seek equal rights. I think one of the ways we can do that is at the ballot box. With the Men's Progressive Club, I organized the first Black voter registration drive. We registered 1,400 voters, and of them, 1,399 went to the polls to vote against Herman Talmadge, who is a staunch segregationist. But Talmadge still won. It is hard to change the world at the ballot box when most Black people in Georgia are still disenfranchised under state laws that were passed by white Democrats. It is hard to change the world at the ballot box when Black people are subject to discriminatory practices that have been around since the turn of the century. Even though it is hard, and many, many times it is discouraging, I believe voting and taking part in elections matters for our community. I am thankful that it is possible for people like me to vote in Gainesville. And the more people that we can get registered, the more people who can go to the polls without fear, the better chance we have of truly changing the world at the ballot box. Gainesville has been my home for almost 20 years, and I put a lot of effort into making this town a better place for all people. But I am not originally from here. I was born in Jeffersonville, Georgia. It's a small town surrounded by farms, forests, fields, but not long after I was born, my parents moved to Macon to teach in the local public school system. And it was there that I began my education at a segregated elementary school. I also briefly attended high school in Macon before transferring to Morehouse College to finish high school and go to college. At the time, there were very few places and opportunities for people like me to continue their education. Morehouse College in Atlanta was one of the few. It was established at the end of the Civil War in response to the liberation of those who had been enslaved. Now, in the beginning, Morehouse embraced a seminary university model that stressed religious instruction in the Baptist tradition. But throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, the college experienced rapid growth by creating a liberal arts curriculum, which I took part in. I graduated from Morehouse College in 1928 and taught in Americus, Georgia for 1 year before beginning medical school. It is a common practice because of segregation and Jim Crow laws, that most hospitals will not admit black people, and many white physicians often choose not to serve and treat black patients. This is a problem. How do we fix this problem? End segregation. End racial discrimination. This is something I'm working on, but that sadly did not seem like a viable prospect when I was in college. I thought another way to put a patch on this problem is to train black doctors who could serve their communities, which have been neglected. But during the end of the last century and the beginning of this one, most medical institutions accepted few, if any, African American students. Therefore, to combat this shortage of health care and the lack of accessibility to medical education, medical schools were founded specifically to educate black doctors and nurses. I attended one of these schools, the first medical college for African Americans in the South, and the second oldest medical school for African Americans in the nation, Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. The college was established by the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Freedmen's Aid Society in 1876 with the help of Samuel Meharry. When Meharry was just 16 years old, he was hauling a load of salt through Kentucky when his wagon slid off the road into a muddy ditch during a storm. With rain and nightfall limiting his options, Samuel searched for help. He saw a modest cabin that was the home to a black family recently freed from slavery. The family, still vulnerable to slave hunters who were paid to return freemen to bondage, risked their freedom to give Meharry food and shelter for the night. At morning's light, they helped lift the wagon from the mud, and Meharry continued his journey. The black family's act of kindness touched young Meharry so deeply that he vowed to repay it. "I have no money now," he said as he departed, "but when I am able, I shall do something for your race." Tragically, history never recorded the name of the courageous black family, and perhaps their identity even receded in the mind of Samuel Meharry as he grew prosperous in the years that followed. Even so, 40 years later, as the Civil War ended and black citizens continued in their long struggle for rights guaranteed by the Constitution, Meharry seized an opportunity to redeem his vow. When the leading Methodist clergymen and laymen organized the Freedmen's Aid Society in Augusta, Georgia in 1866 to elevate former slaves intellectually and morally, Meharry acted. He and his 4 brothers pledged their support to Central Tennessee College's emerging medical education program. With $30,000 in cash and real property, the Meharry brothers repaid the black family's act of kindness with one of their own. It was while I was at college that I met and married Lillian. She's a beautiful woman and a smart woman. I'm a lucky man, that is for sure. At the time, she was getting a degree in sociology, and now she works as a substitute teacher and as a homemaker as we set up our family. I graduated from Meharry in '34 and then completed my internship at Kansas City General Hospital in Kansas City, Missouri the year after. It was then time for me to come back to my home state of Georgia, and I completed a 6-month residency at the Georgia Tuberculosis Sanitarium. Back in those days, our treatment options for tuberculosis were limited. It wasn't until a decade ago that drugs which are effective against tuberculosis were first discovered. In '36, I moved to Gainesville to truly set up my practice, and Lillian and I started our family. I was not the first black doctor in Hall County, but I was one of the first, and I became a resident physician in the Hall County Hospital. I treat all people. Your race or your creed does not matter to me. I even have white patients, which is a surprise to some, but they trust me and respect my work. I am a good doctor. One night, I got a call from one of my white patients who asked me to make a house call. It was in the middle of the night, and my wife begged me not to go, scared of what may happen if I was seen by a Klan raid or just seen by the wrong person. But my patient needed me. I knew that they would not have called if it was not urgent, so I went. Lillian also worries when I'm out serving in Forsyth and Dawsonville because of the particular brand of racism there. I'll admit that I get a bit nervous crossing those county lines myself. You see, in 1912, white mobs set fire to black churches and black-owned businesses in Forsyth. This came after 2 rape allegations against black men. There was one woman who the paper said, and I quote, awakened and found a Negro man in her bed. This led to the whipping on the town square and the near lynching of a man named Grant Smith, who was an African-American minister and a prominent teacher in the black churches of the county. A week after this event, a white girl named May Crow was found in the woods, badly beaten. She had been beaten over the head. She was bloody and unconscious. The newspaper accounts said that she had been raped, but evidence was lacking. She was taken back to her house and was in a coma for 2 weeks before she died. A lynch mob attacked and hung one black suspect. Then 2 teenagers were hung in public executions following a short trial. I can safely assume all were innocent of the crimes that they had been accused of. The night of May Crow's funeral was the first reported night rioting, and bands of white men gathered together and began to punish the entire black community for what they believed was a black insurrection. Their methods of terror were arson. They burned black churches. They set fire to black-owned homes. They fired into cabins where black families lived. They posted notices warning people that they had a few days or sometimes just 24 hours to leave their homes, or else. Over the course of September and October of 1912, this movement spread and ultimately succeeded. 1,098 black people, families, tradespeople, farmers, artists were forced out of the county. These types of accusations and allegations have existed since before Jim Crow and persist to this day. To borrow a line from Ida B. Wells, this is what we call the old threadbare lie, the tendency to use alleged threats against white women as an excuse for violence and murder of black men. That event I described to you happened almost 40 years ago, but wounds remain. There are scars that have not healed. People remember. It is hard to cling to the ethos of do not harm when I hear of such violence. In my professional life, I have sworn to avoid harm and to promote healing, but the avoidance of harm does not mean the avoidance of pain. Sometimes people might need a painful but life-saving surgery. So how does a doctor reconcile this? The answer that I have come to is that I should help my patients as much as I can by recommending tests or treatments for which the potential benefits outweigh the risks of harm. Do not harm does not mean take no risks. For there to be progress, risks must be taken. Risks whose potential beneficial outcomes outweigh the potential harms. I care deeply about my patients, and I try to treat all of my patients fairly. I value fairness. It is something we do not have enough of in this world, fairness. But sometimes fairness doesn't look the same to everybody. One day, as I was finishing up a simple procedure for a patient, and I told them that the fee will be $5. They looked at me rather questioningly and said, "Well, I happen to know that you did the same procedure for another patient for $3. They did not think it was fair to be charged more, which I understand, since that is all they knew of my story. So I decided to give them a little more context. I said, well, I'll have you know that you can afford $5 much easier than they can afford $3. The patient did a double take when I told them this. But then they gave me a wry smile and paid the $5 fee. Let us remember to do no harm. Let us also remember to take good risks so that we can improve what we can. This school is a sacred place for our students, in the beginning of a long journey that has walked by us all. We are shaping the future like those before us. These students will learn from us. Let us reflect on the lessons we have learned and allow these students to teach us as well.